Kinnett cast here on the Daily Signal, nationally syndicated, first on 93 WIBC. It's a joy to be joined by Vice President of Parents Defending Education, Carolyn Moore. I got to tell you, I'm used to seeing those of us in the education space kind of playing defense. It's a little bit unusual to be on the offensive at this particular point in time by getting things done. We'll get into the Department of Education stuff in just a couple of minutes, but as someone who spends a lot of time poring over the ed data, what was the first thought that went into your head as soon as the NAEP scores, the education assessment scores came out for our country this year?
Absolutely. Well, thanks for having me on. Yeah, I think that the first thought through my mind, which is probably the same thought everyone else had, was, gosh, there's absolutely no correlation between the money we are spending and the educational outcomes of the kids across this country. And I think you can look at different states to see, particular differences, drops, whatever. But overall, I mean, the end all be all is that they keep spending more money. During COVID, they had all these ESSER funds that went to every single school to improve, technology or whatever it went to. And it's clear the money was not spent for teachers to be having one-on-one interaction with their pupils and get them up to grade standards. So I think that was my main takeaway.
I mean, the grade standards aren't exactly solid gold pieces of assessment to begin with. So the fact that we can't even meet these newer, lower standards that have been revised at a much lower bar than maybe 20 or 30 years ago, it's such an embarrassment on the world stage. But it's also disturbing considering how difficult it is to get a student from the job market right out of high school into what career they'll be choosing or where they're going to be getting into things, because it's not like when you could just drop out when you were in fourth or fifth grade and go work in a factory. That's not the standard anymore. So there's also a higher set of standards on the outside of the grade school environment. And it's like a triple whammy, if I could, kind of put it in colloquial terms here. And I'm still not seeing, other than the school choice movement, which we can talk about, which is making amazing strides. I'm not seeing any on the public school side of things, a solution that's been put forward that's actually going to close these gaps, because the gaps are still there no matter who's in the administration, right? Someone has to make up the lost ground.
Oh, absolutely. I think you bring up a great point. I think, the school choice movement is great, but unfortunately, there are still a lot of people in public schools who either don't understand what school choice is or think it's like some really, crazy conspiracy thing, something, akin to like homeschooling. It seems like so out of the ordinary. They don't know anyone who's done it, so it seems crazy, which we all know it is not. But there's still always going to be about 50% of people who are just in public schools, and their parents probably aren't going to pull them out. They're going to remain in that school from the beginning to when they graduate, whether they go into a vocation or they go into higher ed. And like what you said, they haven't put forth any ideas. Now, I think, some of these executive orders and stuff, they're great. But I think what we're seeing from, the teachers union side is they're more interested in advocating for international issues, like protesting for Gaza or putting, that's their emphasis.
Wild. And again, whether you see the teachers unions as an organization that is supposed to advocate on behalf of the working conditions, the rights, the pay scales, the pensions of teachers, or you see it as an institution as they claim to be, which is advocating for quality education, it's failing on both sides. You could even make a very slight, poorly constructed argument that when they throw all of their weight behind DEI stuff and critical race theory and gender ideology, at least you could make a case that, well, they're supporting teachers and students who feel this way. But like these international issues and things that they're throwing millions of dollars into, it doesn't even have anything at all to do with their state mission or their actualized mission. And again, it is yet another embarrassment that so much of our nation's money, and in many states, teachers' money, in some cases unwittingly or without any alternative, goes into these organizations.
Absolutely. I mean, I think teachers, just as parents, they want these kids to succeed because what would be the point of going to school? You're teaching for 8 hours a day. What would be the point of doing that every day if you didn't care about the children? Obviously, they care about the children. But I think, exactly what you're saying about the DEI stuff, also the international stuff. The new Secretary of Transportation put out a statement the other day because of all these, terrible FAA things. And he said something about, we need to get rid of talking about immutable characteristics and treating people differently. Let's bring it back to basics. Let's bring
Right.
it back
Right.
to having safe, reliable transportation. And I think that's exactly what can be said for education. I mean, let's teach kids how to read and write. They took cursive out of schools. Maybe, crazy thought, like, why don't you bring cursive back? Like, I mean, just bring back the basics and then let's see how they do. Let's not teach them for a test. Let's not focus on activism. Let's just teach the kids how to read and how to do math. And then, you know what? We don't have to worry about all those other things. They can make up their own minds about political things and social
Eh,
movements.
it's the stumbling block that immediately just gets thrown into the way whenever we bring up that kind of a discussion, though. And for the record, obviously, I agree with that. Not only is it backed by objective data, it's also backed by groups right now, especially in homeschooling and some charter and private school communities that are trying this out immediately. They suggest, and when I say they, I'm talking about the left-leaning education advocates and college professors class. They start suggesting that if we don't allow public schools to spend a good portion of their resources on equitable counseling and conversations about what's going on today on the ground in the civil rights struggles of DEI in Sudan or whatever else, that our students aren't going to be learned on the things that they consider to be essential. I'm just at a bit of a loss where legislators have the backbone to look at someone who says, oh, well, you need to teach lesbian basket weaving. Otherwise, what's the point? And say, no, basic reading is a priority to the point where they're willing to be called bad things. This is still an issue in kind of the Republican side of the aisle, is they don't want to be seen as evil. So they don't really want to tamper with how public education works. And again, like you said, executive orders are fine, but there's just a little bit more reformation, at least in front of us.
Absolutely. But I am hoping, with just a change in leadership. I mean,
Mhm.
people, these legislators, the state and federal level, they seem a little bit more empowered. And so I'm thinking that, whatever, do these people really need to be empowered? They're already elected, but I think that helps them. That gives them a mandate. It gives them a backbone because like you said, I mean, unfortunately, I don't understand why this is because I think as conservatives, they're very strong-willed people, but for some reason there's like such a fear of being the bad guy. But I think you have to know at the end of the day what you're doing is the right thing for the kids. Like maybe it's
Well,
not going to be an immediate thing, but I mean long term this will help them succeed.
I think maybe that in that statement is a bit of the problem, which is that we're going to have to experiment. We're going to have to experiment. We're going to have to see what works and what doesn't. The problem is that the only guinea pigs available for the study are kids. And that immediately sounds off warning bells. But you shouldn't experiment on children. Oh, the horror, the pearls clutching starts immediately. Well, we do need to experiment to see what are the best educational methods for children. And that involves parents really taking a chance on putting their kids in a different educational system or trying. It's really the parents who have the right to make this chance. And although perhaps with the connotative language of the word experiment, it sounds horrible. How could you experiment on children? And in reality, we do need to experiment on different educational methods, but instead of experimenting on what pride flag to hang in the classroom, it needs to be what reading methodologies in education are the best we can find and how we incorporate those. And
Absolutely.
you have to break a few eggs to make an omelet. And this is genuinely a case where we need to be open that just because the word experiment comes into play that, we can't shutter the doors and call it a day.
Oh, I completely agree with you. But I think that every parent knows if you have, more than one child, you can tell, oh, Susie, I mean, she's a hands on learner. And
Mm-hmm.
George, I mean, actually, he's more interested in recess, but if you can get his attention, he really likes science and math and he just excels or whatever the issue. Every kid's different. And so I think teachers know that too. And I don't think that that's anything different than has been done now. I mean, we can call it an experiment, but I mean, that's been done previously. If kids aren't fast learners or they learn a different way, maybe there's more one-on-one interaction. Like bring parents back to the classroom and help them read with the kids. There's such like a fear of having parents around at this point, ever since, all the stuff with COVID and the book stuff. And it's actually ridiculous because parents are a resource and they should be looked to as such. They know their kids really well. The teachers do too. And together, I mean, you can really help these kids move on and be contributing members of society.
There also needs to be a different threshold for what we consider to be a success point. You have so many different state standards. We were running out of time, but just to throw this because I know you guys over at PDE are quite fond of this one particularly. When you're looking at the threshold for success in state standards across the country, there's a standard for understanding the cultural significance of Chinese music in the 1800s. It's like, why is that a standard for education?
Mm-hmm.
I get it. By the way, Chinese music from the 1800s is really cool. Goes through 3 different reformations. Bet I didn't know that one, huh? But like it is really neat. Should it be a standard for K-12 education? No. Like you got to prioritize some things over the other. We don't want to seem to do that in this country.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I think that a lot of those standards are outdated, and that's something that definitely needs to be looked into,
I think it's
especially.
also a bit of like virtue signaling. Like,
Yeah.
our students, they know
Totally.
Chinese music from the 1850s. It's like, what?
Well, I mean, that's like, people who can talk about they take Mandarin. Okay, that's great. I mean, but you obviously went to a different school because the rest of us, had Spanish and French and we can barely count to 10. So, I mean, I think, language and stuff is wonderful. And I think learning about different cultures is wonderful. But I mean, at the end of the day, I think baseline, we need to, just have people know the basics of, start with American history and then let's work our way backwards.
I think you're exactly on the right track. By the way, I'll have you know that just when you said Spanish or French, it took considerable effort not to say habla por ti or like speak for yourself. No, but I really appreciate you guys over at Parents Defending Education. We've been a fan of you guys since the beginning. Thrilled of the work that you and Nicole Neely are doing. You guys are truly some of the best advocates for parents and for great research. Your database, I think we've pushed on the show before, maps around the country, or excuse me, a map of issues around the country so that parents and legislators can stay informed. Carolyn, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. Have a good one.